This video is going to be all about using the present perfect. What? You might ask. I already know the present perfect. I don't need to watch this. Well, before you click off this video, ask yourself honestly, do I really use the present perfect properly? Because there's a good chance that you don't. How's it going, everyone? I'm David. Welcome to the English channel. You see, while the present perfect might be one of the most common tenses in the English language, it is arguably the most difficult to use properly. There are a couple of big reasons for this. Firstly, you, as an English learner, may not have the present perfect tense in your own language, and therefore you kind of need to get your head around the concepts of it. It's like me using the Portuguese past imperfect. When I translate it to English, I need to use a couple of different constructions depending on the situation. But my brain doesn't do it instinctively. That's because we don't have a past imperfect tense in English. On the other hand, maybe you do have something called the present perfect in your language. Perhaps it's even formed in exactly the same way. But I bet it's not used in the same way. And the rules you know for your language's present perfect interfere when you start using the English present perfect. As well as this, there are other difficulties like remembering to use the proper form of have and knowing the correct past participle if the verb is irregular. In my experience, students often find knowing the form of the present perfect to be the easiest part about it. The real difficulties lie in the application of it. So that is what this video will focus on, the uses of the present perfect. I'm not even going to look at the form of it. I'm going to assume that you know all that stuff anyway. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? It's helpful to think of the uses of the present perfect and the present perfect continuous, which I'm going to include in parts of this video, as falling under two basic categories. So firstly, actions and situations that started in the past and are continuing up to the present or just before the present. And secondly, finished actions or events that have unspecified times. So let's talk about the first category. This category of using the present perfect, what we could call continuative, although don't get this word mixed up with continuous, describes states and activities begun in the past and continuing till now or just before, and also repeated actions that happen up to the present. Some typical sentences that have a continuative meaning of the present perfect include, I've known him for 6 years. He's been painting the room since breakfast time. I've been checking my Amazon delivery updates all morning. I've often wondered where he goes at lunchtime. Remember, for this kind of usage of the present perfect and the present perfect continuous, we use the vanilla present perfect with stative verbs, i.e. the verbs relating to states of being and senses, like know, love and hear, and the present perfect continuous with dynamic or action verbs. It's also used for continuous actions that happened until very recently. For example, if someone looks hot and sweaty, you might say to them, you look hot and sweaty, are you all right? And they could answer, I'm fine, I've been running. And it's understood that they aren't running now, but they were running until very recently. Okay, so it's really important to remember the kinds of prepositions that we can use with a continuative use of the present perfect. So we can use the preposition for to introduce a prepositional phrase that expresses the amount of time an activity or state or repeated actions have existed, like in my previous example, for 6 years. Likewise, we can use the word since to introduce a prepositional phrase to express when the activity, state or action started. So, since breakfast time. Adverbs and adverbial phrases that have a similar meaning to until the present time can be used with the present perfect. So these include up till now, recently, lately, or so far. So we could say a sentence like, I've been tirelessly writing a script for this video recently. So to review what we've gone over so far, we use the present perfect to describe states and activities that began in the past and continue up till now or until very recently. We use the present perfect with stative verbs and the present perfect continuous with action verbs. Keywords we often hear with the continuative use of the present perfect and present perfect continuous include the prepositions for and since, and the adverbs and adverbials up till now, recently, lately, and so far. Okay, so that's all for the continuative use of the present perfect. But what about the second category that I mentioned earlier? So firstly, we use the present perfect in this way for completely finished actions that have importance now. So for example, giving news is often reported in the present perfect. For instance, the pound has fallen to its lowest value in 20 years. When the pound fell is unspecified. It is a completely finished action, hopefully, but if I'm reporting it to you, then it's because I think it has some relevance to the present. We also use it for telling news in conversations, so something like, "Have you heard? Rosemary's had a baby." So here, having the child was a completed action in the past, but it has relevance now because I think it's news you might want to know. Another way the present perfect gets used like this is when we talk about the result of a completed action. Imagine a grandmother seeing her 10-year-old grandson for the first time in a couple of years. She would probably say something like, "Look at how you've grown." So when the boy grew is sometime in the past, but the grandmother uses the present perfect as she can see the result of this action and it has relevance to her in the present moment. Before I continue, it's probably important to say right now that when I talk about these uses, and this also applies to the continuative uses, is that they are not mutually exclusive. What I mean by this, a single instance of the present perfect could quite easily be a piece of news and tell us about the result of something at the same time. I don't want you to get the impression that these uses can only exist in isolation, okay? Okay, the next way we use the present perfect like this is when we talk about experiences. This is probably very familiar to a lot of you. Again, the action happens in the past, but it has relevance to us now because it is part of our memories and knowledge. So questions like, "Have you ever?" are the typical way to ask about experience. When expressing experience, we can also refer to the amount of times we have had the experience, although we don't specify when we had the experience. So for example, I could ask, "Have you ever been to Mexico?" And I can answer it with, "Yes, I've been there 3 times. Or, "No, I've never been to Mexico." With experiences, we often use ever and never. Ever meaning at any time and never meaning at no time. We can also use it to talk about accomplishments. So we could say, "He's recently achieved his 20-meter swimming badge." Or, "I've been awarded Employee of the Year." And remember, when we talk about experiences and accomplishments, we don't refer to the time that it happened. I keep on saying this because it's a really important point, again, and it's one of the big ways that it's different to a lot of present perfects found in other languages, okay? It's important to point out that when we talk about our experiences, we can introduce it with the present perfect, but afterwards, if we want to talk in more detail about it, we need to use the past simple. So I could answer the question, "Have you ever been to Mexico?" And I could say, "Yes, I have. I went last year." So with this, I have answered the question with the present perfect, but I have given further details with the past simple. I also want to mention here that with the present perfect, and this applies to all uses of the present perfect, is that we generally can't use it with certain prepositional phrases of time which give specific time frames that have finished. And these typically start with at, like "I have done it at 7 p.m. Oof. In, like "I have done it in June last year. Ouch." And on, like "I have done it on Monday. Oh God, no." For these sentences to be correct, they would need to be in the past simple. But a little bit of clarification is needed here. It is probably possible to find constructions starting with these prepositions that refer to a period of time that hasn't finished. So for example, 2 people could be talking about the amount of work they've done that year, and they are talking in June, and one of them might say to the other, "I have done most of my work in June." Now this would be possible to use because the period of time, i.e. June, hasn't finished yet, okay? The same applies to using the present perfect with phrases like "this year," or "this week," or "this month." As long as the period of time hasn't finished, then using the present perfect is okay. when it comes to talking about periods of the day, like this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, it gets a little bit more complicated. As long as the speaker is still in the same period of the day, then they can use the present perfect. So for example, if the speaker says, "I've checked my emails 3 times this morning," and the time is 11 a.m, then that's fine. But if the time is 3 p.m, then that's not cool. It would need to be in the past simple or past continuous for it to make sense, okay? If you found this video interesting, then subscribe to my channel to get more videos on the English language and how it works. Anyway, let's get back to looking at the uses of the present perfect. So, associated with this use of the present perfect for experiences is that we often use it after a superlative phrase, as these sentences will show you. "She had the worst voice I have ever heard," or "This is the best soup I've ever tasted." Another way the present perfect gets used like this is when we talk about actions which are expected but not completed, and the opposite, so actions which are unexpected but completed. These kinds of sentences usually use the present perfect with other words like yet, already, and still. So for example, "Have you finished doing my homework for me?" "No, I've not completed it yet." So here, yet means the action is not completed, but it is expected to be at some point in the future. The word still could also be used with a very similar meaning, and still is typically placed before the auxiliary verb have. "Have you finished doing my homework for me?" "No, I still haven't finished it." On the other hand, the student could have also said, Yes, I've already done it." And this would mean the student completed it before it was expected. Okay? Alright, moving on. We can use the present perfect to talk about actions that were completed recently. Their relevance to the present is their close proximity to it. To show the action is recently completed, we use the adverb just before the past participle. To show the action was done very recently, say a minute before, we use only just. So, "I've just finished doing your homework," or "She's only just found out some terrible news." Okay, do you see what I mean? The last use of the present perfect that we're going to talk about in this video is for using the present perfect for the future. So, whatever you do, don't get this mixed up with the future perfect. That's a completely different thing. The reason I'm including that here is because we're talking about a completed action that would be relevant to some point in the future. This is when we use the present perfect in a clause starting with an adverbial like when, as soon as, until, before, and after, together with some form of future tense in the main clause. So, take for instance, "He's going to let you know how it went after he's spoken to John." Or, "As soon as I've found out, I'll let you know." Or even, "Until she's seen you, you will not be able to leave." Now, using the present perfect in these kinds of adverbial clauses is optional. You could also say these sentences with a present simple in the adverbial clause, because you will also hear it with the present simple. Okay, so that just about wraps up all the uses of the present perfect that I can think of. So to recap the second category of uses for the present perfect, we have seen that we can use it for talking about the news, talking about experiences and accomplishments, using it with superlatives, for expected but not completed actions, and its opposite, for actions that were completed very recently, and in adverbial clauses for the future. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe to my channel. I'm interested in hearing about what languages you speak and if you use the present perfect. Does it work in the same way to the English present perfect? Let me know down below. And if you would like to see how grammar forms such as the past perfect and participle phrases get used in a real English text, then check out this video right here.